Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we are involved in a study of the feast days of Israel. We are specifically focused at the present time on the seventh day, Sabbath. Now, let me reiterate something that's so critically important. In Leviticus chapter 23, Numbers chapter 28, all of the feast days, every one of them that we're going to study, all right, every one of them either began or ended or was a Sabbath unto the Lord. Now, what did Sabbath mean? Well, it meant cessation. On this day you shall do no normal labor, was the Lord's words to Israel. So cessation meant Sabbath. Sabbath meant cessation. And that's why it is so important to realize that the seventh day, along with all of the other Sabbaths, symbolized, represented, foreshadowed, typified a time when man would cease from his labors. Now, I don't have to tell you, I know, those of you who are watching, and so many really wonderful folks who observe the Sabbath are and have been watching my videos. I appreciate that so very, very much. Now, some have spoken up, some rather vehemently, energetically would be a good word to put that, insisting that the ceremonial feast days have passed away. They've been fulfilled. I mean, after all, Passover was fulfilled on Pentecost, at the cross, and Pentecost was fulfilled on Pentecost, and the Feast of Weeks, Feast of Unleavened Bread, etc., were fulfilled during that interim. So we are told, well, see, that's the ceremonial feast days. They passed away. What they foreshadowed has become a reality. Christ is our Passover. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 5 and 6. But then they tell us, well, we're still looking for the fulfillment of the final three feast days. Well, wait a minute, folks. If you're going to tell us, oh, all of the ceremonial feast days have been fulfilled, but then you're going to turn right around and tell us that we're still waiting for the judgment, the second coming of Christ, and the resurrection. You just contradicted yourself. If Rosh Hashanah, and somebody told me the other day, don't use that term, it's a later term. I'm sorry, nothing wrong with the term. Just nothing wrong with it. It's just one of 10 terms that are used for the Feast of Trumpet. Okay? Yom Teruah is another common term. I like that term. I just don't use it as much. But there's nothing wrong with Rosh Hashanah. It's the term that is still used in modern Israel today. It's used in the commentaries. It's used basically everywhere. So forgive me, but I don't see a problem with using that. So anyway, once again, if you're going to tell us, oh, well, Paul said in Colossians chapter 2, 16 and 17, let no man judge you, therefore, in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths. Oh, why should we not be judged in respond or in regard to those? Oh, well, because Christ took the handwriting of ordinances that was against us and contrary to us, nailed it to the cross, and that was the ceremonial laws. Who said, where did God say that the, quote, ceremonial laws were against mankind? Where did God ever say that the Passover was contrary to man? And somebody may say, well, Paul said it right there in Colossians chapter 2, where he says the handwriting of ordinances, therefore don't let any man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days. So therefore he's calling the new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, that was contrary to us. Sorry, folks, that is not what the text says. That term, handwriting of ordinances, is from the Greek word cheirographon. Handwriting, literally handwriting. And as has been noted by numerous Greek scholars, it is a reference not to the Torah, not to the feast days themselves. That term, cheirographon, is kind of a technical term. It's a handwriting of debt. It is when you incurred a debt for any reason, and you wrote a bill of debt, indebtedness, and you gave it to the guy that you owe the debt. When you paid the debt off, that handwriting of ordinances, which was against you, was destroyed. Generally speaking, it was torn up or it was burnt or whatever. But as Losey and Wright and McKnight and others say, and point out, the force of the Greek text is not that Paul was saying that the new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths were ordinances and handwritings that was against Israel, contrary to Israel. He said no. These scholars say no. The force of the Greek is that Paul was saying that debt incurred through sin, the debt incurred through violation of Torah, was nailed to the cross. This is that already but not yet issue of forgiveness. But what's the point? The point is, Paul did not say the ceremonial feast days have been done away with. As a matter of fact, as I have already noted, I haven't emphasized it enough, but notice Paul says, don't let anyone judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are. He uses the present tense. They were, when he wrote, in approximately 62 AD, when he wrote, they were still present tense shadows of the good things about to come. The good things had not yet been realized. They had not yet been fulfilled. And by the way, when futurists say, Paul said, new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, those were ceremonial laws. They've been taken out of the way, nailed to the cross. But then they turn right around and they say, we're still waiting for, as I noted at the very beginning today, we're still waiting for the judgment, the second coming, and the resurrection. I'm sorry, that's a massive, major, fundamental self-contradiction. If you are going to say that we're looking for the judgment, the second coming, and the resurrection, then you are saying that the present tenses of Colossians 2:16 and 17 are legitimate. You are saying that those feast days are still binding, still imposed, until those things are fulfilled. And that includes Yom Kippur, which means that if you say, well, Yom Kippur hasn't been fulfilled because Christ hasn't come out of the most holy place yet, the second time, then you're saying that we are not forgiven today. Because after all, if we are forgiven, Yom Kippur has been fulfilled. And if we are forgiven, Christ has come. the types and the shadows of those feast days has been fulfilled. So what happens? Well, what happens is, very commonly, you find commentators on Colossians chapter 2 and say, well, yes, it's true that Paul used the present tense. And yes, it's true that he used the future tense of mello, about to be fulfilled. But what Paul was doing is, and this is one of the most disingenuous, theologically driven explanations, not because of the text, not because of the Greek, but because of theological presuppositions. So in fact, Scott McKnight makes point of this, and he says, well, what happens is, because commentators are convinced that Christ had already fulfilled those things, and Scott McKnight does not say one single word about the typological meaning of Rosh Hashanah. Day of Judgment. Not one word about Yom Kippur being the time of Christ's second appearing. Says not one word about Sukkot being the fulfillment of resurrection, or the resurrection being fulfillment of Sukkot. Not a word. But he does say, well, commentators, understanding and believing that those ceremonial feast days were nailed to the cross, they, quote, reimagine the present tenses of Colossians chapter 2. You know what that says? Do you know what he's just trying to be nice. Scott McKnight's a very nice guy. Had the privilege of meeting him. Scott McKnight says they reimagine the Greek tenses. And what that means is they deny them. They distort them. They pervert them. And they say things like, well, when Paul says they are, present tense, shadows of good things that are about to come, he's speaking as if he was still living under Torah, anticipating the fulfillment, but he believes they were already done away with. Well, let me remind you, if Paul believed that the new moon's feast days and Sabbaths had been fulfilled, had been nailed to the cross, then Paul believed that this day of judgment, the second coming, and the resurrection had already been fulfilled. Yet none of the commentators who, quote, reimagine the Greek tenses of Colossians 2 believe that those feast days are fulfilled. So on the one hand, they tell us, oh, they were nailed to the cross. They're done. They're over. They're past. And they turn right around and tell us we're still waiting for those things to be fulfilled. Folks, do you catch the power of these massive self-contradictions? You cannot affirm. By the way, all three major eschatologies agree. They really do. The day of judgment, right? Second coming, right? Resurrection, right? They've been taken out of the way. They tell us. Thomas Ice says the law of Moses has been completely fulfilled and removed. Okay? I was raised in the Churches of Christ Fellowship, a millennial world. One of the most fundamental doctrines of the amillennial world, especially the one in which I was raised, Paul nailed the law to the cross, including the feast days. But if you were to ask a Church of Christ minister today, are we still waiting for the judgment, second coming, and resurrection? Well, of course, absolutely, positively. Oh, okay. So you're telling us that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot are not fulfilled? And in the first place, I don't want to seem too negative, but some of the preachers in the Church of Christ would go, what are you talking about? What in the world is Rosh Hashanah? What is Sukkot? That's really sad. But folks, like I've said, you've got to catch the power of this. All three futurist eschatologies, to reiterate, believe that the law in its entirety, the law of Moses, ceased either at the cross, there's a growing number of people who would then say, or AD 70. Okay? But then they're still looking for the fulfillment of Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. That is a massive contradiction. And when you say today, we are still looking for the fulfillment of this Sabbath, and yet you say that the ceremonial feast days have been removed, that is a massive contradiction. But I don't have time to talk about that today. So thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget, order the February 2-book special. Save yourselves almost $14. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Beautiful banner there. Just click it, order the books, and like I said, you'll be glad you did. Now, Friday, be back with you. Going to begin an examination of the book, The Future of Rome. Now, I want to tell you right now, I will be almost skipping over the first several chapters of this book because they're not dealing with the future of Rome as it relates to the claims about the book of Revelation. No, pardon me, the authors of those particular chapters, pardon me, are simply concerned with showing how did the Romans view their own empire. They're not talking about Revelation at all, none whatsoever. I don't feel any need to discuss those chapters. They're intriguing from a historical point, to be sure, but they have nothing to do with the book of Revelation, the dating of Revelation, the application to Revelation. So I'll be skipping over all that, and I'm going to be focusing on the chapters that ostensibly correlate, in their view, the information about Rome's future and the book of Revelation, and how that might impact our understanding for the dating and the interpretation of the book. Okay, that starts Friday. I'll be back with Mike Sullivan for Preterist Apologetics. Be looking for it. It's great stuff. I'll see you there.